So this is me, and I recently started a company called the dblTilde Collaborative. Tilde is my favorite little symbol, and you know, tilde means approximately. It means close to perfection, but not perfection. Double tilde means you're getting closer. It also is also a sense of flirtation with it. And since those are all things that we do with active transportation, that's why I decided to name the company the dblTilde Collaborative. Plus, I collaborate with folks. I'm a planner and a practitioner. I've worked in complete streets, multimodal transportation, active transportation, older adult mobility, and safe routes to school. And I'm here, as I said, to talk tonight about Idaho's transportation, changing transportation landscape. So what we're going to accomplish together tonight is I really need your input on understanding the current transportation landscape in Idaho. We'll talk about what's changing, whether it's some of the things you like, how you value certain elements of the transportation system, what's changing, whether it's slow or rapidly. And then we'll take a look at what other communities are doing, how their transportation system is changing and adapting. And we'll end up talking about all ages and abilities transportation, which is something that's really kind of guiding a lot of the work that we do right now. And then we'll close out by encouraging you all to take action. So given that we are not in person, we are working virtually through Zoom, we've got a number of engagement tools. You've seen some of them, the cameras, so we're sharing our photos of each other, our video of each other. And periodically, down here, we'll have open discussion where we'll unmute you. We're also going to use something called Mentimeter, which is a surveying platform. You'll log on to what this says here, menti.com. You'll be asked to enter a code, and we're going to have a few questions scattered throughout the presentation. We'll ask you to answer those questions, and everybody can see the answers to the questions. And then for some of the other engagement, we're going to use something called idea boards. You should, I think that Sarah is going to put in the chat. Is that correct, Sarah? The bit.ly?
Yes.
For the links for that?
Yes.
Okay. So if you want to write these bit.ly down now, I'll speak a little bit slower. And this is what Idea Boards is a virtual sticky note. So you will, when you look at the boards, there's a topic for each board, and there'll be a little plus sign. You can click on that plus to get a sticky note, and you'll type what you want to say in that sticky note, and we can talk more about it. Is everybody ready to go, to move to the next slide? Now, we didn't do introductions, but I am going to ask you a couple of questions to get started with Mentimeter. So if you could go to menti.com and enter this code where you're asked, 394386. I forgot to delete. I thought I deleted this data, but when we were practicing today, but so it's going to let me see if I can do this. Hang on. There's a map of Idaho that has 7 districts in it, and you should see on your screen which district you choose based upon this map. So everybody so far is in the Southwest District. Let me show that map again. Okay. Do we have anybody who's not from the Southwest District? 14. How many folks do we have attending, Sarah?
24.
24, okay. Let me click back. to here. So if anybody is not from 3, you can see where you're from, the number. Okay. So let's move on to we have a second question, and this one is a little bit different. This is we're asking you why you're attending tonight's Citizen Planning Academy. You have just a short sentence. You should have a little place to enter that information. You can do it on your smartphone or tablet, or you can toggle use your laptop, whatever works for you. Oh, to hear from me. Well, thank you. General planning and transportation information. Yeah, I always learn when I talk about this. I'm glad you're here and that you have an interest in transportation. Oh, who's a transportation engineer? I hope that I provide some information that's helpful. You'll notice this will scroll. Load up the toolbox. I like that. Southeast Neighborhood Association representative is here. Great, great. I'm a big fan of Idaho Smart Growth as well, and so I hope that this is a good planning academy. Someone here is an advocate for public transit, and we are going to talk about public transit a little bit tonight. Okay. Oh, someone wants to know what's going on with mass transit funding. I don't know that I have an answer to that question, but someone else from Idaho Smart Growth might be able to answer it. Okay, let's, are we ready? Any other more comments? If not, we'll go back. I can X out of this. Okay. Well, that's great. I got a sense of where people are from geographically and the things that you're interested in. So as you might have imagined, under the underlying theme of tonight's presentation on the changing landscape is change. And I like to share cartoons, and I am sharing with you one of my favorite cartoons that's based upon the theory that we don't change because that's not how we do things around here. I know I react to change differently depending upon what that change is. And if I'm not interested in changing, I often say that's not how we do things around here. But sometimes change is welcome, and we are more readily and more easily adapt to it. So hopefully tonight, in the spirit of at least understanding what changes might be taking place, we can move through this presentation. Now, this is the first opportunity where we have to use that idea board. So if you can type this bit.ly into your browser, we're going to ask you to give us 3 thoughts that you have that come to mind about the current transportation landscape. So what you do is you just click on this to add a sticky and then type in a thought you have about the current transportation landscape. I'm going to add one. I just put one that says it's complex. And if you like that one, you can click on the plus and give it a thumbs up. I would just ask that you not send it to the trash bin yet. Not sure what what landscape means with respect to transportation. Just as you're thinking about all the transportation options and the network in the state, think of it kind of as a landscape, much as a yard has different bushes and different planting areas, or maybe just grass. Oftentimes we do think of it.
I got a couple of questions in the chat. It is a bit.ly link. It's different than the Menti page. And I apologize, it's not letting me put a copyable link. So you have to actually type that in,
Okay.
bit.ly/3C9 lowercase o 1H capital Z. Sorry for interrupting.
That's okay. So much potential to be great. I want to hear more about that as we go through the presentation. Someone said a lot of rapid change, and you'll have a chance in a couple minutes to talk specifically about what's changing rapidly. I think that our advocate for transit put the comment up that transit is lacking. A need to have multiple transportation options, that's true. This is a little bit different in terms of public engagement, engaging in the presentation, so I hope you feel comfortable with it as we proceed through. Need to modify with population growth. I agree, whether there's generally more people or whether people are concentrating in different areas, whether you have people that are more interested in particular types of transit. More trees, I love that. Yeah, yeah. Confluence of 3 state highways that are all incomplete or over capacity. Wow. And then we have our first 2 sticky notes about bikeways and also walkers. Public education and awareness. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. I think it's something that you all can be really help advance. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. So we have a few people that agree that we need to have multiple transportation options. Somebody agrees about modifying the population growth. Lots of agreement with auto orientation. So we're going to keep this up, and I will. You're welcome to add to it. You might keep this open, this window open on your browser, and add to it as you think of other things as we proceed through. So I can get, okay. So that's a general sense of what transportation looks like in Idaho. And there, we talked a little bit about some of the features of it, but we're going to ask you to do a little bit more. We've identified 7 features or elements of a transportation system. Travel speed, and that doesn't necessarily mean you're traveling fast. It just means kind of what speed you would like to travel, regardless of mode. Travel time reliability, which can be pretty important to some people. Having more than one mode choice to make your travel, your trip, so flexible mode choice. Flexible route choice, where you can go more than one route. Ease of access to destinations. How easy is it to get to where you're, that last bit to where you're finally going. How you feel about safety, and how you feel about the enjoyment of the trip. So we're going to go back to Mentimeter for this. And we're going to ask you to, that's Oxford, Maryland. We're going to ask you to identify which 3 features of today's transportation system, of these 9 features, are the most important ones for you. And since everyone here is from the Southwest region, it's not going to be quite as colorful, but we'll get a sense of what's important. So right now, ease of getting to my destination is kind of in the lead. And travel time reliability is next. I think that's one of the things that is important to a lot of people as well. Safety is coming in third. Okay. So it looks like ease of getting to destination, travel time reliability, and a sense of safety are the top three things. And then travel speed, flexible, low choice, and flexibility in route choice are the next one. And Sarah and I had added enjoyment of trips. We rated that high, so it's interesting that that's not quite as important for you all in your travels. Okay, we're going to go back. Any thoughts about these features? You're welcome to chat something, or if you want to make a comment, we can unmute you. Okay. Oops. I thought I did this the right way. So we're going to go back to another ideas board. So we've talked about the comments on the general transportation landscape. You've talked about what's important to you, the top 3 things among 7 things, features of transportation. And some folks mentioned when we talked about the transportation landscape, what's changing. So we're going to ask you specifically what's changing kind of slowly and what's changing rapidly. And these are things that you can decide what time frame, maybe when they're changing slowly from last year or they're changing rapidly from last year. So again, just click on the X, whether it's slowly or rapidly. Click on this and think about some things you want us to talk through, what you feel or things are changing with the transportation landscape.
And in case anyone, if it's helpful, I'll say it out loud so you can type it in. It's bit.ly/2 capital W R capital CM P capital S. Sorry, I'm not able to share that as the link. That's really a bummer, but hopefully you're able to type that in.
And I can go back to the slide if that would be helpful. Oh, we got one. Response to, it's too slowly. We're changing to, responding to changing population with needed infrastructure. It's interesting, I'm not sure who put this up, but one of the things that I'm curious about is how we can predict where people are going to be living, particularly older adults or kids, so that in 5 years, so we can invest in that infrastructure today. Scooters are changing rapidly. They kind of burst on the scene, didn't they? And in some places there are too many, in some places they're not enough. I agree. Completing the sidewalks always takes longer than we would like. It's interesting how we can make a large investment in widening roads. It seems to happen really rapidly, and yet it takes a lot more time to make an investment in sidewalks, which oftentimes costs a lot less. Yeah. COVID did make a quick change in things, didn't it? And I don't know whether in where you live, you've noticed that your community is making more room for people walking and biking. Most things are changing slowly. Speed limits are changing slowly. Yeah, there is a process you have to go through to change speed limits. Okay, we'll give you another few, maybe half minute here, see if there's anything else. So what I'm hearing is what seems to be important are sidewalks, travel travel ways that are not motor vehicle, being responsive to where people are, where they need to travel. I also see that this patience with traffic, that people are less patient. I'm interpreting that as people are less patient with traveling in traffic. Okay. As I say, keep this up if you'd like, and you can add things, and we will share this. I'll share this with you when we're done. So we've talked about sort of your general impression of the transportation landscape in Idaho from where you sit and where you travel. You've told us that reliable travel time is important, safety is important, and then you've talked about some of the things that are changing slowly. Some of the things with active transportation are changing too slowly. Some of the things that are motor vehicle oriented are changing too fast. So I want to share, are there any comments on that before we move on? We're pretty much on schedule. We have a timeline for this. We're pretty much on schedule. If there are any comments? Anything in the chat? The chat bar, Sarah?
Nope.
Okay. Well, then I want to talk with you about 4 trends, and these really consolidate a number of things within them. So hopefully you'll see things in here that you've experienced, observed as well. We're going to talk about mobility agility, what I call more stuff in the right-of-way, the trend to consolidate and innovate, and the need to be inclusive and to restructure. So first, mobility agility. What does that mean? Well, that means that's kind of like the flexibility and mode choice question, the option that you had about a feature of what's an important feature of the transportation system. It means that you feel pretty comfortable moving from one mode of travel to another, whether it's for one trip, so you might take a bus someplace and then walk home, or you might walk someplace and take a bike share bike home. And it also means that for the same trip at a different time, you might choose a different mode of travel depending upon how you feel, what the weather is. If you're going to the grocery store, how many groceries you feel that you might be bringing home. So mobility agility is dependent upon a number of things, and you might guess what these things are. First, there needs to be a network. You can't walk someplace if there isn't a complete sidewalk network. You can't bike someplace if the bike network isn't complete and safe. You can't take public transit someplace if the transit service doesn't go close enough to where you're going, that finishing that trip by walking or biking isn't possible. Or if that transit service isn't offered at the time of day or the frequency that works for you. So mobility agility depends upon a number of things. Many of the sharing economy modes rely on web-based or app-based methods to reserve, to find out where your vehicle is, and to pay for it. So there are a number of things that go into mobility agility, but it's becoming more and more common, particularly depending upon where you live, obviously. So we're going to unmute the phones and see what your experience is, either where you live in Idaho or when you've traveled other places, or in talking with friends that live in other places. Anybody have an experience with mobility agility that they'd like to share?
Feel free to either unmute yourself, or if you'd rather put it in the chat bar, either is fine, and I can.
We were in San Diego a year and a half ago in December, and of course it's a much higher population area, more funding for infrastructure, but they had an excellent public transit system. If you were waiting at a stop, you could connect or you could enter a text and you would find out when that bus or mode was going to be there next.
Yep. Yep.
It was
And
very well integrated.
Yeah. Yeah. And did it take you long to learn what the routes were?
You didn't really have to work very hard. I mean, you could, you know, we asked our hotel concierge for a couple of ideas and got a map, and it was pretty easy to navigate.
Okay, that's good to hear. Anybody else? Okay.
Can you hear me?
I will, pardon?
Can you hear me?
Now we can, yeah. Who's this?
Okay. This is Gary, and my greatest frustration as a pedestrian is in Boise, there is very little enforcement of vehicles not yielding to pedestrians at intersections. Very little education that is required by the law. I think a large majority of drivers don't understand that the law is to yield to pedestrians at an unsignalized intersection.
And that makes it difficult to walk. That reduces the sense of safety that you have. And we're going to talk a little bit more at the end about some ideas of how to improve that education and safety as well. Yeah. Yeah. You know, I lived in Seattle for 2 years. I recently moved back to Washington, D.C., and I will say I really did appreciate mobility agility when I lived in Seattle. I oftentimes would leave work and take the bus up to Trader Joe's and overbought because I tried to have a small enough bag, but sometimes I bought heavy things. And so there was a bike share bike that I could take and go back to my apartment. So that's a really comfortable sense of mobility agility that I've experienced. Less so in Washington, D.C., because I don't think the transit system is as good. And there aren't as many people, at least where I live, biking, but certainly walking is possible. Okay. Anything else about mobility agility? Last chance? Okay. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is one of my favorite things. It's called more stuff in the right-of-way. And what that means is that because Complete Streets is really about making space for all modes to travel within the public right-of-way, it by definition means that there's going to be more things, more signs, more pavement marking, more geometric features. And these are photos that I took in Sandpoint a few years ago. The one on the left is of a sidewalk that has kind of a rain garden. It used to be that we didn't have anything, or we had maybe a strip of grass, but here there are trees and other plantings, and there are rocks that are really designed so that planting strip is part of the stormwater management system. Just around the corner from that, on the main commercial, one of the main commercial streets, I hate to call it a mid-block crossing because for a pedestrian, it's not mid-block, it's their direct path of travel. But there's a connection there for each side of the street for the pedestrian. And this high visibility crosswalk is a little bit more visible than if it wasn't there. There's a yield to pedestrian. Gary mentioned that. There's a yield to pedestrian sign. To shorten that crossing distance and make it more comfortable for pedestrians and actually to slow motor vehicles when they travel, there's a little curb extension that has bike parking on it, some planting beds, and a bench for folks to sit on. So when you're traveling down their street, there's more stuff in the right-of-way to see. Here's an example of, in Maui, Hawaii, what they see as their transportation future. Lots of things. They may be saying you might see this on your street. They're also saying you might see all these things on your street. So take a minute to look. We've talked about high visibility crosswalks. We've talked about transit service. We haven't talked we've talked a little bit about high visibility crosswalks. We haven't talked specifically about bike lanes, and these are bike lanes that are, these are right next to the curb, but they're also separated bike lanes, which have this buffer, this stripe buffer and flex post buffer between where the bike travels and where motor vehicle travels. We've got traffic circles, which have their own sense of sidewalks around them. Got lots of sidewalks. There's a speed hump here to control speed. And there's a multi-use path that provides, in some cases, a more direct path of travel. We tend to think that people who are biking and people who are walking need to follow the lines of streets, but there can be more direct paths of travel for people who are walking and who are biking, cut-throughs and connectors, and certainly a multi-use path is one of them. So what are your reactions to this more stuff in the right-of-way? What's your experience been traveling in an area that has more things to see and to travel through and to negotiate, whether they help you or help other travelers?
It requires more courtesy of the users.
It certainly does. You have to be more aware as well. Diane, did you have? Oops, we need to unmute you.
Did you? Okay, thanks.
Gotcha.
You have to pay more attention, which is good as a driver, I'm talking about, and as a walker too, or a bicyclist. But also I wanted to give a shout out to the people who put in roundabouts near my several places that I go to constantly, 2 in my neighborhood and 1 out on Hill Road. I love them, and they make you slow down, they make you pay attention to other people and what they're doing. I think it's a really good thing.
Yeah. That I appreciate hearing that. Roundabouts, I think people maybe the first few times they use them are a little hesitant, but they really are a really nice feature to do all the things that you talked about. Any other thoughts about more stuff in the right-of-way? More things visually, more things to travel, to incorporate into your travel habits?
Carol, this is Emily. One of the things that I've noticed is outdoor seating for restaurants, and that really restricts the pathways.
It does, and I don't know whether is that an issue in Boise?
Well, certainly in downtown Boise.
Does it? One of the things that is required is an accessible pathway of whatever it is, 30 inches, 36 inches. Are you finding that's not sufficiently wide enough, or that minimum standard is not being met?
I think generally it's being met, but sometimes it interferes with the landscaping, the streetscape, and you really kind of have to walk around a lot of obstructions and
right.
and sometimes wait until somebody else passes.
Right. And that happens when sidewalks aren't wide enough. So you might have a really nice wide sidewalk, and then have a cafe on part of it, and that in essence narrows that sidewalk. So I understand that. One of the things I noticed in some cities is they have little markers that designate in the sidewalk that designate the limits of where that sidewalk, that cafe seating can be. So the proprietor of the restaurant clearly knows kind of the boundaries that they need to stay within.
I think they have to get a use permit to even do that from the local highway agency.
Right. Agreed.
I think from my experience walking around downtown, the sidewalks are so nice and wide that you really feel it when you're squeezed back to a typical standard width.
Yeah. That's a great point. That is a great point. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for making that.
both of these comments also show is that it's important that it's nice to walk, so that we have trees, that we have space, and it's not just concrete and cars, but it's actually pleasant to be there. I think then one can walk much longer distance compared to, so it doesn't feel like work, but it's actually pleasant and enjoyable.
Right. And that was one of the things that we were hoping that when we asked you to identify the top 3 features of a transportation network or system, the enjoyment of the trip is one of it. So if you're a pedestrian and you have pleasant places to walk where there are interesting things that what they call activate that space and create some stickiness, so you want to hang out for a while. Maybe go into a shop, maybe stop for a cup of coffee, chat, sit down on a bench, chat with a friend. Those are features, that's stuff in the right of way that serve you as well. So that's a great point. Thank you. Okay. So the third trend to talk about is what I call consolidate and innovate. And this really is about how the transportation vehicle or mode functions. We're going to talk about 3 things, transit and TNCs. And TNCs are transportation network companies. I had to learn that a short time ago, such as Uber and Lyft. Bus stop parklets and curbside management. So transit and TNCs, you know, transit typically is a fixed route or a fixed guideway, and because it is the public that everybody has access to, and yet for various reasons, public transit can't go down every street or every other street, and so by definition there are some parts of a community that are not easily accessible to transit. And so transit agencies have consolidated and innovated by forming partnerships with TNCs such as Lyft. And there is a federal program that funds this called the Innovation Sandbox, called Mobility on Demand, where a company, a TNC such as Lyft, will offer a ride to a bus stop or a transit stop for the same price as that transit fare. And I'm happy to say that Valley Regional Transit has that. It's called Lyft Transit Connection. It costs $2 to get a ride anywhere in this service area. And you can go to any of these qualifying bus stops. The service is available from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Friday, and 7:30 to 6 p.m. on Saturday. Not the same hours in every case as transit, but pretty close. So that's one way that transit is maintaining its ridership and remaining attractive to transit riders by joining up with a TNC such as Lyft. So another way that there's consolidation and innovation is we go down to the bus stop level, and that's to create a bus stop parklet. Now, some of you may be familiar with Parking Day, where we convert a parking space or more into an interesting, fun little parklet, a place to hang out. And this is, as I said, this is an outgrowth of that, where you're creating this parklet on a more permanent basis, typically around a bus stop where people are gathering anyway. This is an example from a community in California. They can be covered, they cannot be covered. But the most successful ones establish a sense of place. You can see there's a little bit of advertising here. There's a little bit of food. I think that's food. Baked goods, yeah, bakery here. Now this bus stop parklet is in the street. I don't know whether this was a bus stop or whether it was parking and they removed the parking, but that's certainly a consideration. It's near a school crossing, so you might have school kids coming here before school or after school. But it's something that's happening, And actually, we are, I'm working with Elaine and Deanna to apply for an AARP grant to test out some bus stop parklets in Boise. Has anyone seen one of these? Okay. So the last of the three things in terms of current trends for consolidate and innovate is what's called curbside management. And we kind of talked about this when Emily talked about the constrained sidewalk space because of cafes. This is actually the other side of the sidewalk, the part of the sidewalk that more directly interfaces with the roadway. There are lots of competing uses for that curbside space, whether it's benches, whether it's a transit stop, whether it's a newspaper box, whether it is a loading zone or metered parking or some other kind of parking, whether there's a desire to have a bike lane there or some kind of bike parking. You can see here's a little cafe. So what communities are doing is establishing more formal programs to manage that curb space, because it is public space that can be used to support other community goals, whether they're transportation or economic vitality goals, whether they're related to public health. Some communities have very formal programs beginning with inventorying what is there already, what uses are there, and what adjacent uses there are. They may commit that to some kind of GIS, geographic information system. They may have some kind of smart system that tells them how often certain spaces are used. You've probably been in a town where there are designated cab stands. I mean, I will say that Boise, because of COVID-19, is actually doing a little bit of curbside management where they're converting existing metered parking spaces for takeout at pickup at restaurants, because more people are driving, picking up food at a restaurant, and they need a place to park to get that. So that's an example of curbside management. Any thoughts about curbside management? If you've been someplace, now that you've seen it, that you realize that was a program that community had? Diane, we need to unmute you again.
I'm curious, I don't know how much you know about how things are managed here in Idaho, or in Boise. We have ACHD, which manages the streets, and then we have the city, which manages the curbs and everything else. And sometimes, if you're going to manage something like that, you've got to have them both working together. And in the past, we have not always had that situation politically. I'm hoping that things are changing with our new mayor and other things, but can you kind of talk about the management of this and how it would work in a very unique situation? We're the only place in the whole country that has this kind of a management system.
Yeah, I think you're right that it needs to be managed very carefully. You know, as they say, the same way you hug a porcupine, very carefully. But I would say that I don't, you know, many times when there is a state or a regional agency that manages a street that's going through an urbanized or a more populated area, the function of that street changes. You know, they say state, and I know that the highway district is not a state agency, but oftentimes state DOTs are concerned about travel between jurisdictions. But when that state road becomes Main Street, it really functions much differently. And so there needs to be a partnership so that the local community understands the state, or in this case, the county highway district, what their goals are. But that district also understands that this is Main Street. There needs to be some partnership. I would say start out small. Try to get agreement on things that might be the most important things, and have specific measures to know whether that it's working for both sides, and then go from there. But yeah, it's important. You can't, it would be unfortunate to kind of, cripple is not the right word, but not to get the greatest benefit from the curb and the sidewalk and the adjacent land uses because there wasn't that ability to manage that interface well. And there are certainly lots of great examples that I can provide that other communities, what other communities are doing, so that the highway district can see what could be possible, if that would be helpful.
One question that came through the chat that I'm not sure has gotten addressed yet is Sue asked about the example of the bus stop parklets and whether or not they're movable so that they can be flexible to the roadway needs.
They can be flexible, and I think if we can go back to this one looks like it's fairly modular. It doesn't look like it's secured into the ground. So I think it depends upon the construction that you use. And certainly it could be something that could be added during the weekends only. For example, if there's bus service on the weekends that would take people places, or it could be moved if there's a parade, for example. You know, if you've got a civic ceremonial street that 3 times a year there's a parade, it certainly could be moved. So it just depends.
Carol, this is Deanna. Can I jump in real quick?
Yes, please.
So in addition, in response to Sue's question, most of the places where these occur, they can be temporary, but often the community's goal is that they're not temporary, and they're identified that this is a road or a street where the roadway need is changing. People, you know, you accommodate cars, but the priority is no longer the car. And I think it's important to recognize that what roadway needs are what we decide they are as a community, and we can choose to use our roads however we want.
And sometimes they can be put in on a trial basis, and you find out the community really loves it. And motor vehicle travel or bicycle travel in the roadway isn't harmed. There's no real impact on it, and so it ends up being a win-win, which I think, Deanna, is what you're talking about. You want to get to those win-wins. Okay.
Carol,
Yeah.
Miss Elaine, could I ask a question here? Have you ever seen, getting back to Emily's comment about the sidewalk cafes and narrowing the sidewalk, where they did something like this, not necessarily for stationary sitting, but for movement, so that you could make up for maybe the loss of space on the sidewalk and still maintain the sidewalk cafes that people seem to enjoy so much?
Yeah, and I think, you know, I've seen these a lot in Europe, where there's more public transit and people tend to walk. But I feel like, oh no, wait a minute, let me go this way, curbside management. So here's an example of where in this curbside management, where there is a cafe that is in the street, and so you can maintain that sidewalk space.
Yeah.
But again, there needs to be a community conversation. There needs to be sort of a recognition that at least that we're going to try it, and that it can be successful, hopefully.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay. So the last thing I want to talk about really relates more directly to people. It's called, as opposed to kind of mode of travel or vehicle of travel, and it's called, the trend is to include and restructure. These are some images that don't do it justice, but you get a sense that it's about school kids. Safe Routes to School used to be is a program. I know Idaho Smart Growth manages Safe Routes to School programs. But it used to be kind of standalone. Now it's being brought into the fold to include and restructure other policies and programs. Age-friendly work used to talk about older adults primarily, and now what it really means is all generations. And another thing that's happening is emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion. What it means is that we're thinking more about how we make transportation investments, where we make transportation investments, so that there's a sense of equity in terms of what the result is. All ages and abilities, as you can see here on Bannock Street, is a change in the use of this street, that it used to be not open to motor vehicles, and then there was a desire in Boise to have it be a street for motorists to use, bicyclists use it, meditation space for the hospital as well. So in making these and being more inclusive and restructuring things, it means that we rethink policies. And as I said, we rethink where we make investments for the people that we're trying to include. And we really rethink how we measure what a successful outcome is. And that really leads us into all ages and ability, which we're going to get to. But we didn't ask you how old you are, but we're going to have 2 questions now around age. So if you could go back to your menti.com. And if I can drag this out of the way, I got all your pictures down there. I'm going to ask you to tell us your age group. And you notice we had thought we would have folks from different parts of the state, but we do have someone from the Panhandle. Here they come.
Wrong time zone.
He just joined us because of time zone issues, so we're glad to have you. Thanks, Richard. Welcome. Okay, so most of the folks on the call are in that 50 to 64 group. I'm unfortunately outside of that group, but I'm assuming many of you have older children or children not at home or children about to leave home, if you've got children. We do have 3 people who are in their early-ish adulthood and early career, and 3 people who are more established in their career and their families here. And then we have 5 folks and I'm one. I would have been in this category, so that's great. We do have a nice mix from 19 to 79-ish. So when we talk about all ages and abilities, it is about all of us who are different ages, but it's also about the people that mean something to us that we interact with. So we're going to ask you to think about 3 other people that you're close to and what their ages are. You can do all 3 ages on that one question and it will display here. Ooh, child, 2 children, that's the children. Okay, we're getting there. So when we talk about all ages and abilities, it's not just what our ages are, but we could have asked you about 5 people, and it would have been even maybe the same span, but even more. But we asked about 3, so you can see we all have an interest in all ages and abilities, because it's not just the age that we are, but the age the people that we care about and are close to. Let's see if I can get back to, so keep that in mind as we continue to go through this. Okay. Shoot, this happened again.
Hang on. Let me get down to where we need to be. So All Ages and Abilities is called AAA, and it doesn't mean AAA like the car people, but All Ages and Abilities is really an umbrella term for the things that we've been talking about, where we're consolidating, we're including, and we're innovating and restructuring the way we develop the transportation network. It means all of these folks down here who are different ages and have different abilities. It also means it recognizes that they may travel by different modes as well, whether they're walking, taking the bus, biking, scootering, driving, riding in a taxi. And so it brings into place the things that we've talked about up to now, the mobility, agility, more stuff in the right of way to accommodate different needs of different people. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about the common approaches that are used. There are design guidelines such as the Americans with Disabilities Act, the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials, AASHTO, which has guidelines for designing sidewalks and roads. And the companion to that, the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, which are about signs and pavement markings, anything that has to do with regulating how people travel. The Federal Transit Administration has guidelines. We're talking about transit on accessible transportation for people with disabilities. But then there are other guidelines such as the National Association of City Transportation Officials that really combine a lot of these into really great guidance documents. And then there's the universal design approach, which really takes the lead from ADA and says, we can really design things that are comfortable for everybody. In addition to this, there are three things that I think are very important when we're talking about designing for all ages and abilities. Just common sense. Does it make sense to you? Is it something you would use? And if you are planning or working with other people, listening to what they have to say about how they use the transportation system or what they need from it, and then experiencing it yourself so you can apply all of those things as well as the guidelines and the standards to what you end up with. So I want to talk for a minute about universal design. There are 7 principles of universal design really drawn from the building industry, and this really grew out of designing places for people to live, homes, apartments for people to live. And 5, you can, I know you can count quickly. There are only 5 of these principles here, and I want to talk about but the 5 that I think are most applicable to a transportation system. One is equitable use, that we want to develop a transportation system that's equally usable for all ages and abilities. It has to have flexibility in it so that the elements can be adjusted, people can adjust what they do based upon what's there. It kind of relates to the question about sidewalk widths and cafes and curbside use. All ages and abilities in terms of universal design also needs to be simple and intuitive, what I call coherent. You shouldn't need an owner's manual in order to know how to use what's built. It should be designed and marked and colored in such a way that you understand. There needs to be a tolerance for error. This is something which the Vision Zero movement has really emphasized, that you admit that people do make mistakes and you need to design and build a system that is forgiving so that people can make mistakes and not be hurt or killed. And then there needs to be a low physical effort in using it. Now, you might think that this is a little bit out of sync, but I'm going to give you a couple of examples of why low physical effort is important when designing for all ages and abilities. So these are some guidelines, and now we're going to talk specifically about 3 different modes of travel and how to think about all ages and abilities for people using those modes. The first one, I've combined people who are walking and people who are using transit, because honestly, many people, most people walk to a transit stop, to and from a transit stop. So we will concede that transit stops and sidewalks must meet approved design standards and guidelines, but that doesn't really relieve us from using our common sense, for listening to what people are telling us, and for experiencing it ourselves. And if you do that, these are some of the things that you're going to find. That a bus stop like this one on the left, which doesn't have a low level of effort for somebody who's in a wheelchair and needs to get to that bus stop. Sure, they can travel in the street, but then they have a lower sense of safety. But this bus stop really doesn't serve all ages and abilities, and it really doesn't make a lot of sense. And it really needs to have a sense of place, whether it's a stop that's got a traditional shelter with all the other features that many stops in Boise have, or whether it has a bus stop parklet concept, which really creates even a greater sense of place. Moving beyond that bus stop, the bus service is important. It needs to build into the schedule enough time for people to get on and off. If it's near a daycare, where parents are getting on and off with children in strollers, multiple children in strollers. Whether it's in an area where there's a pretty robust non-commute service, so the bus service needs to serve the travel needs. Another thing for all ages and abilities is to attract all ages and abilities. This is an example from Palm Springs, California, which I perceive to be really marketing to commuters and perhaps younger professionals. But why not promote to older adults to ride, or to families to ride? And again, if that bus service serves the needs, then there's a lot of benefits that can come from that type of advertising. In terms of the pedestrian network, to get to stops and other places, the network needs to be complete, and it needs to have usability. It can't end, it can't have cracks, it can't have low maintenance. There's a value in code enforcement for pedestrians in transit. I don't know if you can see this no parking sign right here on the sidewalk, not just one vehicle, but two. So if you're walking down, there's a senior center here, there's a bus stop up here. So if you're in a wheelchair or mobility device, or you just want to walk in a straight path of travel, you now need to go out into the street. Trimming vegetation, making sure trees don't overlap the sidewalk, cleaning off the sidewalk so people don't fall. These are small things when you're designing and operating an all ages and ability network for people walking and using transit that are important. One thing that I always find interesting and a little discouraging is you cross the street, you want to go to this bank, and you get to this point and this is what you see. What that says is, we don't want you to walk here. We want you to drive here. So you walk down the sidewalk this way or that way, and you have to walk into the driveway along with motor vehicles. And it can be a little bit disconcerting. On the other hand, this is a little bit hard to tell, but there is a diagonal pathway leading from this corner to the drugstore. And as you can see, I was just there. I didn't ask people, I didn't stage this. There were just people using it because it's what they need for all ages and abilities. This is one of my favorite new examples, a new school that was built. And you talk about sidewalk width. You want a wide sidewalk at a school. It's one of the places where you want it so people can walk sociably. And yet this new sidewalk was put in about as narrow as it could be. And there's this fence that provides no, what we call shy space, no wiggle room at all. Not even space for 3 students to walk abreast. One of them would have to be walking on this grassy buffer. So these are some things when you're thinking about all ages and abilities for the pedestrian network and transit. Another thing is working with the natural environment. It can be heat, it can be cold weather, ice and snow, it can be wind, it can be rain. One quick example, I was waiting at a bus stop in Seattle on this pretty steep hill, and I noticed this older couple using walking sticks to go up the hill. I was walking down this hill a short time later and felt I needed a railing because this is Cherry Street in Seattle. It was really too steep for me to walk down comfortably, but then I noticed that there were railings and steps. So you don't need to have steps. A railing might have been just enough. And it's not just me who's older. It could be a child that could use it. It could be somebody that's carrying something heavy and needs something to kind of grab onto. We can talk a lot about crossing times, but this is an example of how to consider how different people of different ages and different abilities, the amount of time that they need to cross the street. These are in meters, but you can see that a toddler of 2 years old walks about, I don't know, about 18 inches, 1.5 feet per second. Whereas somebody who's able-bodied, regardless of their age, that may be a jogger, walking a dog, walks maybe about 4.5 feet per second. And so think about that when you're building an all ages and abilities network, when you set the signal timing based upon where that signal is. As I said, we can talk more about that, but we're running a little short on time, and I want to wrap up. Bikes, trikes, and scooters, again, must meet approved design standards and guidelines, but again, use common sense, listen, experience it. I mentioned NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials. They have a great book for designing all ages and abilities. Companion piece, Don't Give Up the Intersection. So they define all ages and abilities as children, older adults, women, people riding bike share, people of color, low-income riders, people with disabilities, people moving goods and cargoes, as well as confidence cyclists. So think about designing for all of these folks as well. Some of the common trends, this photo I grabbed from the Don't Give Up the Intersection guide because I thought it had a lot of good things in it that we can talk to. Some of the common trends in all ages and abilities for people who bike are separation. You can see here a separate bike lane, separate parking, separation here, separate crosswalk here for people who are walking, a separate bus lane, which really contributes to visibility. It increases sight lines. It makes us more visible regardless of what mode you're traveling in. It allows whatever mode you're traveling in to see other people. So these people walking can see the bicyclist, somebody biking here can see the pedestrians, somebody driving can see the pedestrians. Also, completeness is something that is a trend in designing and maintaining bike facilities. You'll see that from this photo that the bike lane goes through and around. There isn't that sign that says bike lane ends and then you're biking and you think, what do I do now? And then the way these are designed really does provide flexibility for people of different abilities, people of different ages, people using different sized bikes, whether it's a cargo bike, a trike, whether it's an e-bike, whether it's a regular pedal bike. And remember, flexibility was one of the things, was one of those principles for universal design. So quickly, what can you do? I understand that all of you are really action-oriented, so I have some suggestions for you. First, we've talked about a lot of things. We've talked about a number of different modes of travel and different ways of looking at it. I would ask you to decide what's important to you. I know we have at least one person that's participating that is really, that public transit is important to them. So decide what's important to you. Learn about what your community is doing. Could be your neighborhood, could be the city, could be the county. Identify ideas from other communities. Here's an example of an efficient, low-cost sidewalk that Seattle installs. It's a way to build out that pedestrian network when funding is maybe not what it could be. It doesn't have curb and gutter. It's got these parking stops, and it's a blacktop sidewalk, but they install these, and in a couple of years, the city will probably go back and install a regular curb and gutter, unless the community says, you know what, we like that. That's just fine. That serves our needs. So identify ideas from other communities. You also want to find resources that fit your community. If you live in a more rural area, this example below is from a Federal Highways Guide to Creating Multimodal Networks in Rural Context, and I'll show you that document in a minute or two. But this shows you how you can take a portion of the roadway and create a sidewalk from it. And then connect with like-minded people. And that's many of you on this call are like-minded, so find others and connect with them. If there are ones that are interested in walking, maybe start a walking group, maybe conduct a walk audit, identify some things that could be improved, work with local planners to try a pilot. If you're near a school or if you have kids in school, and many of you said that you have that group of 3 of people of other ages, there were a number of people that are in school that appeared on that survey. Offer to lead a walking school bus to schools. And then find ways to encourage safe walking behaviors by exhibiting them yourself. And I know we've talked about motorists that may not yield to pedestrians, but there are ways to also exhibit safe walking behaviors that for yourself, for children, for others. If you decide that taking the bus is important, maybe you would like to adopt a bus stop. Maybe you could ride the bus more, take a friend to ride the bus, try taking the bus someplace that you haven't taken the bus before. If it doesn't work quite so well, lobby for some type of pilot change to see if that, and then get your friends to take the bus and try the pilot so you can demonstrate proof of concept. These are some ideas for if you decide that transit is important. If you decide that cycling is important, many of the same things that we had for if you decide that walking is important. Leading a bike train can be at school. It can also be leading a bike train to bike to work. I started biking to work with somebody that I met at Bike to Work Day. I know we're not having it this year, but you can still, when we can get out and bike more, you can still do some of these things. So that's what you can do. And the other thing is on safety, and I really think that this is important. I'm asking each of you to try to generate an understanding among people traveling in different modes by holding an impromptu or an organized safety education for people of different modes. If you get somebody that bikes and somebody that walks, somebody that maybe drives a bus, somebody that drives a motor vehicle, maybe uses a scooter, get them in the same room, understand how that transportation system works. They can share their concerns. Oh, you hear people say things like, it scares me when you do X, and that person can then say, well, it scares me when you do Y, and come to an agreement about how really to travel more safely within a multimodal network. Resources. You probably know where there are a lot of resources already. Idaho Smart Growth has a number of resources. This is an example of what they have from their best practices page. AARP has a lot of great resources for their Livable Communities program and their age-friendly network. Don't forget, their Idaho AARP is here. They're here, they're in Boise, and they have lots of great resources as well. The Safe Routes Partnership started out as the Safe Routes to School Partnership. They now do all ages and abilities safe routes, and they've got a lot of great resources as well. The NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials, I shared some of their resources with you. Go on their website, you can see design guidelines and lots of other publications as shown here. The Federal Highway Administration, this is that small town and rural multimodal network that I had that example of that I kind of shook. So that's one. Accessible shared streets, this guide for accommodating pedestrians with vision disabilities is really important as you design shared streets because people with vision disabilities need those tactile clues. We talked about it needs to be coherent, it needs to be easily readable. And so this is an important guide as well. This is one that I worked on a little bit, Achieving Multimodal Networks. It's a really great resource. And then this one as well, Measuring Multimodal Network Connectivity is another great resource for you.